Oh, hello everyone. And today here at Craft Conversations, I have Jessica McDonald joining me. Jessica, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, as Berna said, my name is Jessica McDonald. I am a textile artist based here in St. John's, Newfoundland, and my textile poison is weaving, and I weave more as an art form, not as much as a craft production. But it's kind of what I'm exploring right now in the past 2 years, and I just graduated from NASCAD, so I just moved home a few months ago, and I'm sitting at my studio and kind of exploring right now.
Fantastic. That those are very exciting times when you
Oh,
can actually
yes.
actually have a studio. Most people work from their kitchen tables, as
Yeah, no,
we're
no, believe me, the kitchen table is also being used. We don't have one anymore.
So before we start talking here, we had like a brief conversation, and we decided to call this segment "To Weave or Not to Weave." And I don't really think that that is the question that you need to ask right now. I think the question you need to ask is what to weave. So
Hmm.
during the past, like weaving is a very traditional uh, thing, and mainly was used to make cloth and usable cloth.
Hmm.
And later in time, weaving became this major art that adorned palaces
Hmm.
and churches and everything. uh, and then end up going back to the production side of it. So, what is your massive opinion and all that I just said? uh,
I think my opinion on that is that weaving is a evolution. You know, you really pinpointed a really good point where it's like, we use it for in traditional methods, and that's in multiple cultures as well, for like clothing ourselves or cloth for our beds and things like that, things that are more maybe utilitarian or for sustainability reasons or to keep your kids clothes or yourself or things like that. But it's really exciting to see how weaving has, it's not just that, it's evolved over time and through different periods and eras and through different cultures. And what's fascinating about that is to see that it's not just a basic cloth, it can be a lot more. And one of the things that like is really inspiring to me is that when I was stuck in that craft production phase, like I didn't enjoy it, and I wasn't looking at it as being anything other than like a utility object. I started looking into weavers who are doing more modern things or have kind of gone in a different route, and that brought me to the art form. And that's where you kind of brought up, adorning palaces or museums and things like that. Is weaving went to maybe a more art form, and the fact that it can do that was very exciting to me because I had never thought about, a piece of cloth, like a blanket or a towel, as being something that could be elevated to that level. And so my opinion is that it's an evolution, and it still evolves over as we move forward in time. I know, for example, here in the province, I've done research. That's what part of my practice is. It's half practice based, half research,
yeah,
and so I've learned a lot through our 30s into 70s, the 1930s into the 70s, how we really used it as sustainability and feeding back to the community, and then going into income and providing to families and going to commercial, so that you know it evolved. And then to see also Ani Albers, who was a famous weaver, be restricted into weaving because it was deemed women's work, and that's kind of all she was allowed to do. But then she took that and she evolved that. She worked within her boundaries and pushed it, and I think that's what weaving has been and what it continues to be.
yeah, it's very interesting. I was recently at the National Gallery. Recently, I mean, in February. Like time is just a
Yeah.
flick right now. And I saw some work that was done by indigenous artists all over the globe for
Mm-hmm.
their exhibition Abadakone. And and the way that weaves tells a story. And I think that part of that evolution is also told through the pieces that contemporary artists are making these days.
Yes, 100%. The moment you said story, I was like, yes, because there's so, like, I did a residency in Oaxaca a few years ago, and we had talked about that before. But it was phenomenal to learn about how they wove and how they incorporate imagery and stories in their woven cloth to represent, their history and their families and their cultures, and only they are kind of the ones who know what that imagery means, and it tells a story to them. Like it's just a beautiful part of weaving and art.
Yeah, I think it's very important that like we understand that there's still the need for the production line, like the weavers that like produce, as you said, like cloth and towels and placemats and
Mhm.
all the myriad of things that you can do in weaving. But it's also really nice to see so many contemporary artists like yourself creating different imagery through the weaving.
Mhm.
I remember one of the pieces that strikes me the most that you made is the lace weaving with the body shape. Sorry, I thought it was a body shape. It's a pear shape. I really like that because like it actually you can see like an evolution of the way you're trying to do the weaving and the way that you uh, add strands to create light and shadow. Uh, so where those ideas comes from? Like,
This is a really funny piece because I have this thing in my brain. I think a lot of artists do it where we overthink and we plan and we try so hard and then we try and it's like an epic failure. And so I was doing my residency in New York when I made that piece, and I kept trying to do this like really artistic thing. And I just like was so fed up, and I looked on my desk and I had a pear, and I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna draw this pear. And while I drew it, I was looking at shapes. And so because with this inlay weaving that I like to do and the transparency weaving that I'm really trying to explore more of is that there's that relationship between light and shadow, like dark and light. And I just drew it, but I drew it in values and sections. And that was kind of like the artist part, the art elements that are being applied. And so once I figured that out, I just took it and I went to the loom and I started weaving it, and I was trying different things. And then, it just kind of happened. And it was really exciting for me because I'm here trying to, rack my brain of like, how can I bring the artistic imagery to my weaving while not using a fancy machine like a jacquard loom or a computerized loom, and what can I do by hand, where I'm inlaying or adding in these elements. And it was one of my favorite things to weave because I was weaving, but I was drawing with my thread, and I was creating this imagery, and I just loved it, and it's one of my favorite pieces, and it's something I want to keep exploring with.
so it's kind of like it just justify how like textiles are all interwoven, because that's like painting with threads is a very traditional embroidery technique,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't try to explore that outside the embroidery board, and then there you are like bringing that to weaving, and I've seen so many people doing that with rug hooking as well.
Mm-hmm.
uh, but it's fascinating to see how the the loom gives you that ability to play with. uh,
Absolutely.
I'm not a loom person, so
It's
do
okay.
you want to explain more or of like what's the loom and how the loom works, and how
Yeah.
you change that into like an artistic practice and not just production line?
Yeah. It's hard. So with weaving, it's not like a canvas, like say a piece of fabric that you can then embroider on and kind of be free a little bit more. With weaving, the loom is the apparatus that helps hold all your individual threads under tension, and that's what it is. It's a bunch of individual threads, and you control by the way you set it up, and you move your body and press the pedals and whatnot, which threads come up and which threads go down, and that's what kind of helps to make these shapes and designs that you see. Like for a twill weave, for example, it's going over 3 threads under one, over 3 under one. And so as I'm setting up the loom, I have a lot of things to think about. And a lot of weavers say this, it takes longer to set it up and plan than it is to weave the project. And sometimes that's very true, because I have a lot to think about, like how far are my threads going to be apart from each other? How close are they going to be? You know, what am I weaving with? What's, you know, and so a lot of it is trial and error, and resetting up the loom every time. But once you get it, it feels good. You're like, yes. And then you get to weave, you know. And so, for example, with that pear piece, I had the loom actually already set up, the warp, which are the threads, already on the loom. They were already set up, and I just kind of went for it, and it worked. But if it was set up a different way, it could not have worked. You know, there's a lot of, I always say I feel like a textile engineer. Like I have to plan so much and like just, it's a lot. So, but yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. And it's still in the conversation of looms. Like, you recently been in a webinar where the question was, where are the looms?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk more about this project?
Yeah, I love this. It's like, yes. Well, it was really fascinating because I did a podcast about a month and a bit ago, or it could have been 2 years. I don't know. Time is weird right now. And with Heritage NL, and we talked about, you know, weaving, and I brought up a little bit of the history here because not a lot of people know about it. And it tied in with some of the research I did at NASCAD, under, you know, generations of weavers, or, you know, time passing and where are they and all that stuff. And one of the questions that were kind of brought up by the person interviewing me was like, well, where are the looms now? And I was like, that's a great question. And so Dale Jarvis reached out, and he said, you know, during these times we're all stuck at home, do you want to venture online for looms and poke around? And I was like, absolutely. And so, you know, this webinar was kind of like a conversation to say, hey, I'm a weaver, I'm here, I'm of a younger generation, I'm really interested in hearing about the older generation of people who did weave or have woven, because it seems like at one point it kind of really slowed down and stopped because, well, really, if you think about it, industrial goods started to come in, and manufacturing and commercialization, and, you know, it wasn't much as a necessity to be weaving. But now that we have this kind of like surge movement again of people interested, there seems to be like this generation gap. And so I'm just trying to close that a little bit, trying to get, you know, the people who are interested now, who might be of a younger generation, wanting to talk to these people who have this knowledge and this interest and the skills, you know, to kind of share and pass that on. And so it was a really great time. There was about an hour, we chatted and we met lots of people, and we got lots of emails after that, and we're still open to having conversations. And that's really what this is about. You know, a lot of people say, well, haven't you done the research already about the history? I was like, yeah, but that's boring. I want to hear the stories. I want to talk to the people. I'm such a visual person. And although I can read, I want to like see, you know, people express their stories and kind of hear how it affects them, and learn about that social history that we have through making. I just love that part.
And I think that goes back to like weaving tells a story. So like, it's not only the final piece, what the final piece is telling the viewer, but like, what's the story of the maker, and what's of the story of the actual loom? Where did that loom come from? Why it changed the way you can weave in a loom than you can weave in a different one.
It's also fascinating because like the loom apparatus itself has barely changed since, like, I don't know, I haven't been alive that long, but like, you know, through history of looking, and it's like essentially since the Industrial Revolution, it's essentially the same setup with some modifications. So to see this same piece of equipment kind of like bounce through time, but we've changed so much, you know, it's really fascinating to see that as well. And that, I think, is really why the loom can continue to be passed down through generations, even though we're changing.
If anyone wants to contact you for these, if they have a loom at home that was passed down from like the great mother or grandfather, how do they do it?
How do they get in contact with me? Oh, you can find me on Instagram if you use the Instagram at my_woven_words, or you can send me an email, which is probably the best thing. I'll get it right to my phone or my computer. Jessica McDonald at NSCAD. It's NASCAD, Nova Scotia College of Art and Design .ca. I'm pretty sure. We'll have it somewhere. I'm sure it is.
Well, I think that to kind of end this conversation, I want to go back to the original question, like to weave or not to weave.
Mm-hmm.
This is not the question, but what to weave. What are you working on now?
Oh my gosh, so many things. Well, it's funny because I'm working on a lot of non-woven things while being stuck in the house. But essentially, it's kind of right now is to gather the stories, to hear people's stories is what I'm really passionate about right now, and weaving and kind of get those connections. But I have some other projects in the works. I recently applied for a grant, didn't get it, but that's okay, to do like a woven community project. And I wanted to, essentially build this structure of a home, because to me Newfoundland is home, but I feel like I have a bit of a disconnect from home where I've been away for so long, and I want to establish weaving in my community. So the kind of idea of building a house, the frames of a house, and then weaving the walls together with people, and kind of like having those things together. So those are some things that I'm planning hopefully to do in the future. But in the meantime, I'm doing a lot of samples and trying to figure out how I can draw with thread on the loom without keeping the structure pretty simple. And yeah, I'm kind of just in that phase of being out of school and being home, and what do I do with my life? so I'm really just trying to play right now and give myself time to play, which is sometimes harder than you think it is.
So you'd say that what to weave is whatever you feel like at the
I
moment.
think, I think you gotta let it do that, because I plan too much. I get in my head, and it comes out, I'm not happy with the result because I put in too much work into the pre-planning, like the design, and I'm just trying to let myself go. So I made a piece a few weeks ago. It was for an exhibition in Corner Brook at the Arts and Culture Center, which is unfortunately postponed now due to COVID. But it was for this exhibition called Newfoundland Through a Window. And it was just about that, and kind of what does that mean to you, go with that. And I did, and I just started drawing on paper of this, this woman looking out in the distance at like this ever-changing world. And I had this connection to outdoor communities and kind of what that feeling is like right now with outdoor communities closing, and the inevitable of them closing, and that feeling. And I really wanted to capture that. And I went to the loom and nothing was working, and I just wove the cloth and I took it off. I started cutting threads and pulling warp strings, and I ended up making a piece I love. But I just let myself go through it. When I spend too much time planning, I'm not happy. So I'm really just trying to explore right now.
Okay, so let's keep exploring and weaving, and
Okay.
keep us up to date with everything that you're working on.
Okay.
And keep tuned, because other conversations will be coming every Friday here at the Craft Council of Newfoundland and Labrador Gallery.
Perfect.